Right before we jump into this video, if you would like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on the website, put your name, email address in it, and hit send it, and I will send you that free guide. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is your user's guide for the Canon EOS 90D. Now, if you just picked one up, congratulations on picking it up. I'm going to help you set it up as well as understand all of the buttons on the outside of the camera, and when we get into the menu section, show you how I personally would set it up if I was using this 90D. Now, if you're looking to pick up this 90D, we did do a hands-on preview, which for all intents and purposes was a review. The link is down below, so you can check that out to see if this camera is right for you. But now, let's take a walk around the outside of this camera. First things first, I'm going to show you where the battery goes, but please understand that this first section is pretty basic, but once you know this stuff, then you can skip ahead to the next sections that get into a little bit more detail. So right here we have the battery door on the bottom. You pop the door open, you pop the battery out like this, and there you go. So this is your battery. I always recommend that you have two on hand, one in the camera, one fully charged in your bag, just in case something ever happens to one, you are still able to use your camera because the battery isn't dead. I know it's simple, but it's just a good thing to remind you. So how do you put it back in the camera? There's this white tab right here. You just go like this, pop it in, it clicks in, shut the door, and now you have a battery in the camera. Now moving over to the side of the camera, this is important as well. Where does the memory card go? Right here. To open it, just press, slide this way, the door flops open, pop the card out, and here you go with your SD card. Now there's only one way to put it in there. There's a little diagram right here on the inside of the door, but just remember that the label will face towards you and that little hash mark cut out of the top of the SD card faces up. You pop it in here like this, press it in, it clicks in, shut the door. This little light blinks here on the back to let you know that it's loaded, and now you have a memory card inside of the camera. Now you may be wondering, how do I put the lens on the camera? Because when you get this camera, the lens isn't on it. So I'm gonna take it off. I'm not gonna show you how I did that yet, but let me show you something. You shouldn't be afraid to change lenses when you're out shooting. Don't worry about dust. Don't worry about, well, you want to worry about getting things inside. You don't want to get anything on the mirror. You don't want to touch this mirror. You generally don't want to leave it exposed to the elements for terribly too long, just because you don't want to get any dust or debris or bugs inside of this mirror box. But this is how you put the lens on. Do you see this white square as well as this red dot on the mount of the camera? These actually mean something, because this lens right here has a white square. This is what's called an EFS lens. This is designed for crop sensor cameras. But you can also put on there EF lenses, which would have a red dot here instead of a square. EF lenses are considered full frame lenses from Canon. There's a ton of them out there in the world that you can pick up, and they still work on this camera. So how do we put the lens on? Simple. We line up this white dot with this white square, and we go like this. It is lined up. And then we turn it away. You hear the click. It is now locked in. So how do we take it off? There's a button right here which is going to release it. You press, you turn it the other way, and you take it off just like that. So if you had an EF lens, you would take the red dot, line it up with the red dot in the camera, and then you do the same exact thing. You put it right here, boom, lock it, and now your lens is attached to the camera. Now let's move to the back of the camera to show you where the on and off switch is. Right here, back of the camera, off to on. You just flick it that way. When you're not using it, you turn it back off like that, and the camera is off. Now moving up on top of the camera to this dial, you will see that when you get the camera and take it out of the box, it is already set to the green mode, which is considered full auto. You set it to this when you first get the camera and you don't know what you're doing. The camera's gonna do all of the work for you, and as you progress as a photographer, you will get out into the P mode, which is basically full auto. We call it professional mode, but it's really program mode. It's where you get out of auto and have more control over the settings in the menu system, which I'll show you a little later, and then the camera is still gonna make all of the decisions for you. Next, you will see something that says TV. No, this does not let you watch Netflix on the back of your camera, though that would be a good idea. It doesn't do that. This actually means shutter priority. This is where you set the shutter speed and the camera sets everything else. Then we've got aperture priority, which is AV. You set the aperture, say you want it set to f4, and the camera is going to compensate with the proper exposure for the other settings, and you don't have to do very much. I lived in aperture priority mode for a good decade when I started out shooting. Aperture priority mode was a great place to start. I do recommend that you figure out how to get into manual mode, but we can talk more about that a little later. This is manual mode, M. M means that you are going to set the shutter speed, you're going to set the aperture, you are taking control of the way that the camera exposes the image. I'm not afraid of manual, being that I've been doing this for close to 30 years at this point, even though I'm 38. I actually started shooting at 13, so it's more like 26, but whatever, 30, 26. As you get older, it doesn't matter. Next, we have the letter B, which stands for bulb mode. Now, bulb mode is used when you want to do a long exposure. How it works is when you go into B, when you press the shutter button down, as long as you hold it down, the shutter stays open. When you remove your finger from the shutter button, the shutter closes. Where would you use this? Well, if you're trying to capture lightning storm or a lightning storm, you would press the shutter down, wait for the lightning. When the lightning hits or strikes, as long as it doesn't strike you, because that would probably knock your finger off the button anyway, you remove your finger from the button and the shutter then comes down. You have a C1, C2. Those are for user-generated settings where you could custom set that. Say you want one set for outside, one set for exposures for inside. You can go ahead and set that yourself. After C2, you have this circle icon, which stands for creative filters. That's where if you want to be all creative and look like you're on Instagram, you could access different things, which I highly recommend you don't actually do, because you shouldn't be doing that in the camera. You can do most of that stuff in post-processing. For example, if you wanted to shoot it monochrome or add some weird looking thing, once you add that weird looking thing to your JPEG, you can never go back to a normal picture. So I recommend not doing that unless you are big onto Instagram and you're a major influencer. I still don't recommend doing it. Moving on, we've got scene modes. That's if you want to shoot portraits. These are custom modes that Canon has already set up so that if you're shooting action and doing a running, they usually show you a running man. You've got a portrait mode, landscape mode. You've got a macro mode for shooting flowers. That doesn't say turn your lens into a macro lens if it's not a macro lens, but these are good things to try out when you're first starting so you can play with the different features, see what you like, see what you don't like, and then graduate from there. Moving over to the right side of the camera, we have the shutter button that I was talking about. This is what you're going to press to take the picture. You press it fully down to take a photo. Now you will feel this when you press it halfway down, that it budges or nudges just a little bit. When you press it halfway, that's how you're going to control your autofocus. So just get used to pressing it halfway and not fully if you want to focus versus taking a photo. Right here, we've got a dial. This dial is going to control your shutter speed. So when you are set to shutter priority or manual, as you turn this dial left or you turn this dial right, you're going to change your shutter speed from higher to lower. Now, how do you change aperture? Well, that's a good question, Jared, because you do it by turning this dial on the back of the camera. So right here is the dial that changes aperture. Moving back to the top of the camera, you have your top LCD screen where you can get a bunch of different information that's here. It says 999 because that means how many pictures I have left. I actually have more than 999 photos, but Canon, for whatever reason, always gives you as many as 999, even if you have more photos on the card. So you get a bunch of different information on this screen that are all controlled by these buttons. This button right here would control your autofocus, so you don't have to go into the back of the camera to make the change. You can do it from the outside. Drive mode is what you change when you want to go forward or you want to go reverse in your car. In the camera, drive mode controls how many frames per second you're going to take, whether you want to take one picture every time you press the button, or when you hold your finger down on the button, do you want to get 10 frames per second? You can control that right from here. ISO button, that's for when you want to change your ISO from, say, If you're inside, you want it higher. If it's bright outside and you want it lower, you can change your ISO right from here. And then the button on the right with this like eyeball looking thing, that's metering mode. That's where you would change the different meter modes. This light bulb means when you press it, you get an amazing idea like, oh, I got an amazing idea. That is not correct. It actually turns the screen orange, so if you're in a dark situation, it lights it up so that you can read it. Let me jump in here real quick and say that the images you're seeing on the screen right now were taken with a Canon EOS 90D and edited using our custom Lightroom presets. Now, if you're new to presets or new to editing RAW files, these are gonna help you speed up your RAW workflow as well as give you a great starting point. To check out these presets, head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets. Over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and afters. And if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale for a limited amount of time. Now, let's jump back into the video. Moving on to the next button on the top of the camera, which is between the command dial and the shutter button, is a autofocus selection button. You'll see this the more that you shoot. When you press this, it's going to give you different options to change where you want your focusing points. So just know that that is there right on top of the camera. Now, moving back to the back of the camera, you have right here something that says start and stop. This is to turn on live view as well as turn off live view. There is also a switch associated with this button on the outside. Right now it's set to the camera mode. So that is for stills. As long as this white line is lined up for there, that's for when you want to shoot stills. And when you want to shoot video, you go ahead and move the switch over here to this red camera, and now it puts you into video mode. And when you start recording, you literally just press start. It's going to start recording, and then you press stop again to stop recording. To close down the shutter, boom, we just flick it back into the camera mode. So one is for stills and one is for video. This AF on button is a way that you can control the autofocus. So if you want to do back button focus, which a lot of Canon shooters like doing, you can control the autofocus from back here and then just use the shutter button to take photos. Personally, I use the shutter button to do autofocus and take photos. I don't like having this set to autofocus and this set to shooting because it's an extra thing. It's an extra step I don't like taking. I like to control the focus from the shutter button and not from the back here, but this may come in handy when you're shooting video. Moving to the next buttons, we see that there is a button right here and a button right here. You see some blue text, which I'll explain in a second, but you also have some white text on the top. This is for your auto exposure lock. This one right here that you would press would then allow you to change which focusing points you want to switch to. But keep in mind that Canon gives you the ability to custom set these buttons to a bunch of different options, which I will show you when we get into the menu setup. But also, when it's blue, this means when you're reviewing an image and you press the left button, it is going to zoom out. So if you have an image, for example, like this on the screen, and we hit it, it's going to zoom out into the checkerboard and show you multiple images. The other way is you zoom in, and that's what you will do to zoom in. And then being that it's a touchscreen, which we didn't even mention, so I'll just mention it right now, you can use this curvy arrow, press that, and it takes us back to the full image. Now, since I mentioned the touchscreen, let's talk about it. This is your touchscreen. It comes here on a swivel out and rotatable screen. Hinge, just like this. It comes closed. You can close it if you're traveling and you don't want to run the risk of breaking that screen, because if you break the screen, you have to send it back. Personally, I don't have a camera that does this, so my screen is always exposed like this, but that's not a big deal. I haven't run into, knock on wood, any issues up to this point through all of my years of shooting, which is like 43 at this point, and I haven't run into issues, luckily. So let me show you a few more things with this touch screen. It flips out like this, like I showed you. But remember, if it doesn't twist, because you're trying to twist it, don't force it or you will break it and you will be upset. So only turn it which way it wants to go. But the cool part is you can raise it like this, you can lower it like this, you can turn it back like this and have it seated right here, which is generally where I leave it set when I'm either shooting or traveling. Moving right here, we have a multi-function button, AKA a joystick with some knipples on it. Knipples are these little raised dots you know, so that your finger, I would like to see bigger knipples because it doesn't really grip my finger, you know, when I'm trying to move the knipples. But you would use this to move your focusing points when you are controlling them when you're looking through the camera. Right here is a Q button. This is a quick menu button. You can see on the back of the screen that it brings up some different options that say, oh, I want to change this. Well, you can go ahead and change that right there if you would like. As I already said before, this is the dial to control your aperture, but inside of that you have a D-pad, aka up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, BA, select, start. That will give you 30 people in Contra. Actually, it gives you 30 men because it was 1987, and at the time, they just had men in the game. So anyway, you'll have 30 people in Contra. Remember that code. If you're too young to remember it, I don't know what to tell you, but it is a fantastic game. Inside, you have the set button, which for all intents and purposes is your OK button to approve whatever it is you're trying to do. Right here, this is your playback button. You press this, it's going to bring up the image that you took prior. Hit it again, it turns it off. But let me show you one more thing. I activate it, I hit the trash can. It says, do you want to cancel or erase? Well, I don't want to erase on the camera because there's really no reason to delete the images on the camera just in case you delete something you didn't want to delete. But I don't want to do that, so there's two ways. I could hit cancel on the screen like that and it won't delete, or I could hit the trash can again and it will take it off the screen. But if you really want to delete this because you're like, Steven, I don't like this picture. Steven's the guy working this camera over here, by the way, for those who don't know. But I'm like, Steven, I'm going to erase you. I hit erase and Steven disappeared, like he's in Back to the Future and he never was born. This lock button right here, it says lock. It's actually a switch. You switch it up like this. It's going to deactivate the twisty button on the back so that you can't accidentally make that change if you don't want to make the change. I don't really lock it ever, so I just flick it down and leave it unlocked. On the bottom of the camera right here is your tripod mount. This is what you would mount a tripod plate to, or if you want to mount it directly to a tripod, you can do that right here on the bottom of the camera. On the right-hand side of the camera, you have your mic input, your headphone jack. They go right here behind these rubber pieces. Boom. When you're not using it, you just put them in and they stay right there. This is where you would put a remote control, a wired remote control from Canon. You have a USB port as well as an HDMI mini right here. So if you want to connect this to a TV, you can connect it to the TV to review your images or to act as a massive monitor. The one thing I haven't shown you yet is that this is your viewfinder. This is an optical viewfinder. So what you see through here is exactly what you are seeing come in when the light comes in through this lens. It bounces off the mirror, goes through a prism, and then shows up in your eyeball right here. It is an optical viewfinder. But keep in mind that inside you will see an overlay that shows you your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO. That's the information down on the bottom of the viewfinder. But right in the middle and over it, that's where you will see your focusing points change or move when you are moving them to autofocus. On top of the camera, you have your hot shoe. This is where you would put a flash or a microphone or something along those lines, anything that can fit in the hot shoe. Right here where you see this plus minus, this is to control your diopter. If you wear glasses, go ahead and focus on something, then turn the diopter until it looks perfectly clear inside of this optical viewfinder, and that means it's going to be set for your prescription a little better than if you just shot it normally. Personally, I wear glasses, but I don't shoot with glasses because it's very difficult for me to get my eye up to the viewfinder and shoot with glasses. Now, you do notice this right here. This is the top of the camera. When I press this button that has a flash on it, ooh, it pops up. Look at that, I got a flash. I can take a flash picture. Ooh, look at previews, flash. That's to help with focus. So you need to pop it up or to pop it down, boom, you pop it down and now it's locked in place. Let me cut in here and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're new to photography and looking to share your work online in your own personal portfolio, use what I use for jaredpolin.com, which is Squarespace. To get a 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. There's no credit card needed, and if you decide that it's for you, use my code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now there's two more things to show you. One of them is down here on the camera. This is your depth of field field preview button, which I've never used in my 53 years of shooting photos in any camera. I never used a depth of field preview. You know what a depth of field preview is when you have a digital camera? It's the picture. Take the picture, look at the picture, and go, oh, the depth of field looks good. The one other thing that I have to show you is, I'm gonna take off the lens to do this. Right here, there's a little LED light. This LED light will help you focus in lower light, except that it turns orange, and it becomes a massive distraction when you are photographing a subject, so I tend to turn this off and not worry about it because I think it's more of a distraction than a benefit. Also, I just noticed this on the front of the camera. This is an infrared receiver, so if you have a remote, a wireless remote, that's what you would point it at. Point it right here, press the button, and boom, you are good to go. So one more time, putting the lens back on, locking it in place. That is the outside of the camera. Now, let's move on to setting up the menu. Now, before I jump into the menu section, I just realized I forgot two buttons on the back of the camera, which are important now. One is the menu button. You press this, and it brings up the menu, and then the info runs through different info on the back of the screen. Now, some of you may be wondering, what is this device that I'm plugged into? This is called an Atomos. This allows me to record the video feed from the camera so that you can see the menu that I'm working with. Now, keep in mind that this will deactivate my touch screen on the back of the camera so that I can't actually touch the menu, but you sitting there watching this can touch the menu when you see a function that you want to change. And now it's time to go through the menu. Keep in mind, this is how I would personally set it up if I was setting up this camera for my personal use. The first thing that I did, honestly, was turn out of the auto mode because the auto mode does not allow me to control much of this menu. In fact, when you go into the auto mode and you hit menu, there are so few options in there that it lets you control that you just then say, well, here, camera, you do everything. But in this case, I'm in manual. If you are in AVTV or program mode, then you can control the entire menu. Basically, you are unlocking the power to control all of the camera. Kind of like if we were at Castle Grayskull. It unlocks the power of He-Man, because he's got the power. Anyway, let's start off with the first things first. This says image quality. Right now it is set to large JPEG. I personally shoot RAW, as you can see. If you go to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com, you can pick up your I Shoot RAW shirt and show the world that you shoot RAW. If you don't know what RAW is, it is an uncompressed format. JPEG is a compressed format. RAW is a much larger file because it has more data. JPEG is a much smaller file because it throws out a lot of data that the camera companies don't think you actually need. I recommend shooting RAW plus JPEG when you first start out so that you have both files for when you decide you want to edit those RAW files. RAW to me is the best way to go. Now keep in mind, when you shoot RAW, you do have to edit each one of those images in something like Adobe Lightroom, but you will see over time that you can do a better job editing than what the camera can do, plus you have a larger file. In this case, I can go ahead and turn this top dial, because that's what the dial is showing me to do, to RAW, and if I want to change JPEG, I can go ahead and turn this dial and change it to small, all the way down to S2. If you're just starting out, always shoot in the largest option. Right here, it is set to large. So here we have RAW plus JPEG large. That's going to use more space on your memory card, so keep an eye on the top right hand of the screen where it says 999, and just know that if it says like 50, you only get 50 photos to that memory card. So when you're done, all you need to do is go ahead and hit set or touch the screen. Like I said, I'm using the D-pad to control this because my screen is deactivated. Still image aspect ratio, I leave it 3:2. Image review is set to 2 seconds. This means when you take a picture, the back of the screen is gonna turn on, and for 2 seconds, you are going to see the picture that you just took. I hate this. I turn this off because if I wanna see the picture that I just took, I can go ahead and hit the play button and look at it that way. The reason I turn it off is when I'm taking pictures and my eye is up to the optical viewfinder and I'm in a dark situation, the bright screen turns on, which then becomes a distraction for me when I'm shooting photos. Plus, you shouldn't have to look at every single picture you take. Release shutter without card. If you don't have a card in the camera, which is like having no film in the camera, why would you want to take pictures? You wouldn't. So in this case, I turn this to disabled, and that way it's off. I cannot take a picture if there's no card in the camera. So you can't shoot for a whole day and then realize I have no card in the camera. Lens aberration correction, I don't go in here. Flash control, I don't go in there either. These are just settings that are there. If you want to dive deeper, you can dive deeper into those. Moving to number 2 under the camera mode, we've got exposure compensation. I leave this set to 0. ISO speed settings, this is where you can go if you want to change ISO. I personally do this on the outside of the camera, but you do have an option for ISO auto. ISO auto will allow the camera to decide, does it want to shoot at 100? Does it want to shoot at 25,600? 100 is for when you have a lot of light. The higher you go, 25,600, that means you're in a much darker situation. But keep in mind, your images are going to be cleaner when you're at a lower ISO than a higher ISO. I personally set this myself because I don't want the ISO ping-ponging from, say, 400 up to 8,000 from one shot to the next, because I don't want all of that noise or grain in the image. But you can also set ISO speed range when you're shooting auto to a certain range. So if you don't want it to go to 25,600, you can set it to go to less than 25,600. Oh, not to high, and be like, I don't want it going past 3,200. Personally, I want to control this myself, and I don't want the camera to do anything else. So I have to hit menu to get back out here. We've got minimum shutter speed. Look, I turn off auto. If you're not confident in your shooting at the very beginning, you're probably still in full auto green mode on top of the camera, so this won't matter. You will hear people these days telling you that auto ISO is a great mode to be in. I just don't agree with that, and when you watch more of my videos, you will start to understand why. Back to the main menu, we're gonna go to number 3. We've got white balance. I leave it on auto white balance. If you're shooting with a flash on top of the camera, that's where you would wanna go in here and set it to flash white balance. But remember, if you are shooting RAW, you can change the white balance after the fact with no penalty. If you're shooting JPEG, it's going to be much more difficult to change the white balance after the fact. You can do it, but it's not going to be as good as if you shot RAW and went from the RAW data instead of a baked-in JPEG. You can set a custom white balance, which is what we do sometimes when we shoot video. White balance shift, I leave this zeroed out. Color space, sRGB is where I stay. Picture style is currently set to auto. Now, picture style, when you go in here, you have auto, standard, portrait, landscape, fine detail, neutral, faithful. That's for the practicing. Then you've got monochrome, user-defined 1, 2, and 3. It's nice that they give you a bunch of different ones that you can set. Keep in mind that the picture style is only going to affect your JPEG images. For example, if you were to set it to monochrome and you take a picture, you're throwing away all of that color information and you're being left with a JPEG that is going to be black and white. But if you were shooting RAW plus JPEG, you will still have all of the raw data so that your RAW file will come into the computer and show black and white, but being that you have the data there from the RAW file, you can still get that color information back. Another thing to remember is that picture style is actually more important when you're shooting video. If you shoot video in monochrome, you're only going to have monochrome video because there is no raw video inside of this camera. So you want to make sure that your picture style is set correctly for what you're shooting when you are doing video. But for the most part, I go ahead and leave it in auto and don't worry much about it. Moving on to number 4 menu in the red mode, which is the camera mode. The first thing we see is long exposure noise reduction. I personally turn this off. What is happening is when the camera shoots at higher ISOs, it's introducing noise or grain. So when you have this on, the camera's gonna go ahead and smooth that out, which I personally don't like it doing because it takes an image that may have been sharp but with a lot of grain and make it smooth and look less sharp. This is only affecting your JPEG files and not your RAW files. High ISO noise reduction, I turn this to the lowest or disable. Good, it gives me disabled, so I go ahead and turn it off. Dust delete data, I don't worry about that at all. Live view shoot is currently enabled. If you want to shoot live view photos, that's where you would press this button in and then it would flip up the mirror and allow you to use the screen to shoot with live view. So that's enabled. Multiple exposures is a fun thing to play with. It's currently disabled, but if you ever want to play with it, basically what you do is you will take one picture and then the film doesn't advance, it stays in the same place, and then you take another picture and it exposes that same image image again. I use film as an example because obviously there's no film in here advancing, but that's just to paint that picture that you can take 2 exposures on the same frame, or honestly, you could end up doing more. HDR mode is currently set to disabled. If you did enable that, that would just affect your JPEG files. Moving to number 5, we've got interval timer. That is a built-in feature. This is actually pretty cool, so let me enable it. Now you can see that the interval is set to 10 seconds, and the number of shots would be 10. So after 10 seconds, it would take 1. Then after another 10 seconds, it would take another. To get in here and change this, you hit the info button and you can set the timer to a bunch of different settings like, wow, lots of time. That would be lots of time. And you could also go scroll down, which I can't currently do because I can't touch the screen because it's deactive, but you can change the number of shots that you want to take. Interval timer is actually a really great function if you want to take time lapses of a skyline or sunset or sunrise or whatever, sunrise, sunset, or if you want to shoot Yentl. Let me jump in here real quick and say, would you like to take better pictures in only 11 days? If so, I created a free mini video course that you can sign up for right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/11 days. Bulb timer is currently grayed out because we're not set in bulb mode right now. Anti-flicker shooting is currently disabled. This comes in handy if you're shooting in a gymnasium where you have flickering lights. Those old sodium halide or sodium vapor lights that give you that weird color. When you would enable this, the camera won't take a picture during the flick. It will only take a picture during the So the is when it's not flicking, and then the flick is when it's actually flicking. You really don't see much of a delay, but it will mean that every time you take a picture, you're not getting that flick. So the anti-flicker is actually a really good mode to use. Moving on to the last section here, this is where they hide the stuff that you're really not going to use very much. So the lens electronic MF, I just leave this defaulted, but AF assist beam firing is that orange light that I was telling you about. I go ahead and turn this off. So let me go ahead and disable that because I don't want that orange light coming on, because if you're trying to get candids of somebody and they see this light coming on, they're gonna know that you're taking pictures and they're gonna get a little awkward. Moving on to the next menu section, we've got the play button, which is highlighted in blue. A lot of this stuff I don't ever touch, so I'm gonna go through it pretty quick, like protect images, rotate images. This is if you wanna change things in the camera after you take them. I prefer doing all of this in the computer, so I don't really play with that either. Raw image processing. If you don't have a way to edit your raw files in the computer, you can actually process them right inside of the camera. Skipping to number 3, cropping, resize, rating, slideshow. All things that I don't even touch because this menu, I don't plug this into a TV to show people anything, so I just keep this all at default. Number 4, playback information display. This is actually a pretty useful thing. So when we look inside of here, this is showing you what's gonna show up on the image after you take it and hit image review. You can see that number 1, playback information. Number 2 shows you all of this information. 3 has some histograms. 4 has some other weird stuff that I wouldn't use. If I don't use it, I hit OK and it unchecks it. And you can just see all of the other, they give you a lot of different options that you could have here. The ones that are important to me, I want to see the full image on the screen. I like having the histogram. That is the box more on the right-hand side with the white spikes going up that look like a mountain. That's a digital representation of your exposure. So I like to have that on, but you can go ahead and set this up any way you would like it. Make sure you hit the OK down there so that it will lock in those changes. Highlight alert is currently disabled. What highlight alert is, it means that if you shoot the sky and it's super duper bright, you're gonna see the back of the screen blink at you to tell you that there's no image detail there. That doesn't mean that your image is bad, it just means that there was no detail recorded in that section. Moving down to AF point display, this I actually like to enable. That's gonna show you a red box for where your focusing point was in the image that you just took. I like to see where it was so it can show you whether you missed or didn't miss. Playback grid, I leave off. Next we have view from last scene. It's enabled. I don't really know what this one does. I think it just means that when you go back to playback, it's going to show you the last picture that you were looking at. I just leave this set right where it is. Moving on to the Wi-Fi mode. This camera has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in. It's a great way to control your camera. Say if you set it up over there and you want to sit in the chair and make a video, you can use Canon Connect app to control your camera from the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, which is really cool. So you've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection. We're gonna go in there. You can connect to smartphone, connect to remote control, printer, upload to a web service, and then connect to a wireless remote. I'm not gonna go ahead and show you how to set this stuff up right now. We do have some other videos that do go into that to show you how to use it. Wi-Fi settings are currently enabled. If you're not using Wi-Fi, just go ahead in here and turn it to disabled, because if you're not using it, you don't need to waste the juice because the camera is still looking for a Wi-Fi signal. So I go ahead and disable that. Bluetooth settings, same thing. I'm not using Bluetooth, so I go ahead and I disable it. Nickname, that's the name of this camera. Next it says GPS device settings. That is currently disabled because I believe you need to get a GPS receiver connected to this camera to do it. To be honest, when you connect your camera to your phone, it knows exactly where you are. So that's another thing that you could have imprinted into your images, into the data, the metadata, but I leave this off because it's going to use a lot more juice. So I don't like to use the GPS connecting it at all. Then you could clear wireless settings, which we're not gonna do right now because we just set them. Moving on to the wrench menu. So here you see select folder. I don't actually select a folder, I just leave that exactly where it is. But file numbering is set to continuous. This is important because when you go in here, you've got continuous or auto reset. The reason I have it on continuous is if I take 100 photos, take the memory card out, put it in the computer, check those images, put the card back in, I don't want it to reset to 0 again for the file numbers. I want it to go to 101. Now something to keep in mind is that Canons will reset after 9,999 photos back to 0, or 1 would be the next image after you take 10,000 images, so just go ahead and keep that in mind. Now this is important as auto rotate is currently on the camera and on the computer. Now I set this to on just on the computer. Now let me show you why. I took a vertical picture of Steven, and when I hit the play button, it's taking up the whole screen, which means that you can turn the camera vertically to see the full image. If you didn't, let me show you what would happen. We're gonna go back into the menu. We're gonna turn on the camera and on the computer, and I'm gonna go ahead and show it to you, and now it's only gonna take up a little portion of the back of the screen. So I rather see it rotate on the computer only and not on the back of the camera. It's a personal preference, but I go ahead and do that. Format card is very important. We're not gonna do that right now, but this is where you will delete, reformat, get rid of everything on your memory card. You only do this after you've saved all of your images to your computer and they are backed up, because once you reformat a card, it's basically impossible to get those images back. So when you get a brand new card, you put it in the camera, you format it, and it basically tells the camera how to talk to the memory card, and you're good to go. I reformat a card every time I do a photo shoot, but again, I make sure everything is backed up so that I'm not erasing something that I didn't back up just yet. So you would go over and hit OK. I'm not gonna do that because I already have stuff on this card, so I go ahead and hit cancel. Moving to number 2, we've got auto power off. We currently have it set to disabled because while I'm talking, I don't want it to shut off and ruin this. So you can go in here and you can set it to all of these different options. I would set it somewhere probably between like 1 minute so that it will turn off the camera after you don't use it in a minute. It's not physically gonna flick the switch, it's gonna just turn off the power and then it will have to wake back up. Display brightness, we have it dialed down just a little bit for showing you on the screen, so we can show you the back of the screen. I generally leave this set right in the middle on default. If you're outside and you need it to be brighter because it's sunny, you can go ahead and make it brighter if you would like. Are you enjoying this video so far? Well, if so, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell right next to it so you never miss one of my videos. Also, so you know, there's over 3,000 videos in the FroKive that you can check out right here on YouTube. Now, let's jump back into the video. Next, we have screen off button. It's currently set to remains on. That is where I leave it. The date and time is currently wrong because it's not January 1st. 1919 at 156, because I didn't set the time yet. It's real easy to set the time. You can just touch it on the back of the screen and set it yourself. Language, you can go in here if you're not English speaking, and you can change it to all of this stuff that you, look at all this stuff. Look at all these languages you could use. We could set it to this, English, because that's all I know. So I leave it set to English. Number 3, we've got video system for NTSC. If you're in the United States, it's going to be set to this by default, so I leave it there. Touch control is standard. You have sensitive and disabled. I think standard is the best option. Beep, the beep is enabled. So the beep is enabled when you're doing single focus shooting. You will hear a beep when the camera is in focus. I like having that audible representation of focus because it just gives me a little bit more of a sense that I am locked on and I'm good to go with my autofocus. Moving on, headphone volume, self-explanatory. You can change how loud the headphones are if you have a headphone plugged in. Battery info will show you that we have 50% of the battery remaining. I've taken 64 photos with this battery. Recharge performance, this one's already on 1 because I have an older battery. When it lights up more red, that means your battery's life is starting to wear down, which means you won't get as much time on that battery, and it may be time to replace it. Sensor cleaning, I'm not going to go into right now, but every time you turn off the camera, by default, it is cleaning the sensor. In essence, it's just shaking a little filter in front of it, which is hopefully dropping any dust off of the camera, off of the sensor, and putting it onto a little sticky pad that's hidden somewhere inside of the camera. Moving on to number 4, you've got mode guide is currently enabled. I disable this because I don't need the camera modes because I shoot in manual, but if you're still trying to learn the camera that you bought, which is this one, you can leave it on enabled. We'll leave features on enabled for now. Help text size, if you're blind like me, you can make it bigger size. I like bigger sizes. Bigger sizes are better. Viewfinder display, this is different things that you can set inside of the viewfinder. Electronic level, you can hide it. The grid display, you can either put that on if you'd like, or flicker detection shows up on the bottom when you're looking through the viewfinder. It's actually pretty cool that it lets you know that is in there. But for those of you who want to show the grid display, that's going to help you with getting your lines much straighter. If that helps you, you can go ahead and put that on to show. I personally leave it off. Button info display options, we go ahead and click this. You can see electronic level will come up when you hit info. The quick control will come up when you hit info. If I do not want the electronic level to come up when I hit that info button, I click off of it and I scroll down to OK, or I touch OK on the back of the screen, and that will no longer pop up. HDMI resolution is set to 1080p because we're plugged into this Atomos recording at 1080p. Moving on to number 5, we got multifunction lock. You can see what it's going to lock. Remember how earlier on I showed you that currently it was just going to lock the changing of aperture? Well, you can actually have it lock the shutter speed. You can have it lock if you hit it will no longer let you use this command dial to move anything. Or the D-pad, or it will deactivate touch control altogether. So you can see you have a lot of control over what you can touch and what you can't touch by using the lock switch. Like I said, I don't use the lock switch, but if you find that you want to lock everything in, go ahead and lock everything in and move that switch. Continuing on to custom shooting mode, C1 and C2. This is where you would go ahead and register the settings for C1 and C2. For example, you want it set to 100 ISO at 2/50th of a second at f4 every single time, and you want it to be monochrome in the picture style, and you want it to be shooting RAW plus JPEG. You can set that so that every time you switch into C1, it's going to automatically jump to those exact settings, and same thing if you want to set it for number 2. Clear all camera settings, we're not doing that because I don't want to clear them right now. Copyright information, you can enter your author's name. You can also enter copyright details. This will be embedded in all the files that you take. I recommend that you take the time to go ahead and set this up. And being that you have a touchscreen, it's much easier to enter your information much quicker. Next up, we've got manual software URL, which is kind of funny. It's a QR code that's going to launch the manual. So if this video doesn't give you all the information that you need, pick up the manual and go ahead and read it to find out more information. I'm just trying to stick to the high-level stuff so that I can give you how I would set it and save you a bunch of time. Certification logo is just something that the FCC makes them put in there. We don't need to show you that. Next up, we've got firmware. This camera is set to version 1.0.0. At the time of recording this, there's actually an update to the firmware, so I can go ahead and update the firmware from this section. You just have to go to Canon's website to see when they have new firmware that comes out, which either fixes issues inside of the camera or gives you new features that weren't there initially when you purchased it. Next up, we have the custom function setting menu system. This is where you go in and you can change custom functions. This is for the more advanced photographer because there's a lot of information in here. Right here, there's 8 different things that you could change. There's nothing wrong with keeping it on by default to set where it's set, but as you become a more advanced photographer, you can change these settings to your taste because everybody likes to tweak the camera a little different. So this one, for example, and I'm not going through all of them, is exposure level increments. It will either do 1/3 of a stop or 1/2 of a stop. So you can see you've got ISO speed setting increments, bracketing sequences, number of bracketed shots. There's a lot going on here that you can change. This is to taste. I don't really change much in that first menu. The second one has 16 different things to change. Tracking sensitivity. Oh, do you want it more responsive? You can just tick it up like that, and you can see that now there's a star under number 1 showing you that there was a change. Number 2, acceleration tracking. You could bump that up if you want it to go a little faster. AF point, auto switching, servo first image. There's a lot of information here that you just really need to go in and play with, but I don't change most of this stuff, so I just leave it set to where it is set. Moving to custom function operations number 3, I leave this all the same, I leave this all the same. This is where it gets interesting. So I'm gonna click into this section right here, because remember when I said that you can set the buttons to certain ways that you wanna set the buttons? Right here, I go down to the AF on button. So this means I can change what this AF on button is going to do. So I hit the OK button, I scroll over to one shot to servo. I know I didn't explain this yet, but one shot is where every time you press the button halfway down, and as long as you hold your finger down on the button halfway, the focus is going to be locked. So if you remove your finger, you're gonna have to refocus. Now, if you're in servo mode, when you press the shutter button halfway down, it's going to continuously focus and track a subject. I like to change sometimes from servo, which is continuous focus, to single, which is one shot, which is single focus. And I like to do that quickly without having to go into the menus. So in this case, I can set it right here so that when I press AF on and say I'm in servo mode, which is continuous focus, it will switch it instantly into single focus. So it gives you much more control of the camera, all from the outside without having to take your eye away from the viewfinder. It makes shooting a hell of a lot better. Moving on to number 4, I leave that exactly where it is. Audio compression, that's if you're getting into audio modes, you can leave this set to where it is currently. And finally, clear all custom settings or functions. If you want to clear them, you can clear them right there. I'm not gonna do that. And finally, we've got the star, which is your custom setting menu. This is where you can set things that are your favorites. Say you wanna get to formatting the card quickly, you can put it right there. Say you wanna put auto ISO in here, you can put auto ISO in here. It's where you put your favorites that you come to often that you wanna get to quickly. Actually, I like putting battery life in there so that I can see how much battery life is left quickly when I go into there. So that is setting up your menu for shooting stills. Since you just picked up some camera gear, how do you keep track of everything that you have from the serial numbers down to the receipts? Well, if you said, I don't know, Jared, I just throw it all out, well, that is not good. Well, I want to let you know that I created a free app called My Gear Vault. It's the best way to input, organize, and protect your gear so you know what you have and what it's worth. So head on over to mygearvault.com to download this for iOS and Android. And also, don't forget, you can get an insurance quote right inside of the app. Now that we're done setting up the menu for shooting stills, I want to show you how you can quickly access important features from the outside of the camera without having to dive back in to the menu to make the changes. You see the Q button on the back of the screen? Check out what happens when I hit it. You see all the different options that I have? Well, now I can go in there and independently change them, either by touching them or using the D-pad. Like right here at the top, it says manual. When I scroll over to the right, it shows my shutter speed. Now it says convey subject motion. Thank you, Canon, for letting me know what the shutter speed does. But I can go ahead and make a change if I want. I can just scroll over, turn this dial. We can go to 1/8,000th of a second or dial it down where we need to dial it down to, all the way to 30 seconds. So I'm just gonna put it somewhere. We'll leave it set right to there. You can control your aperture right here. This lens lets you go from f4 to f22. Moving over to the right, auto ISO I do not want, so to get out of it, I set it to 100, and now it's always gonna be set to 100 unless I make that change. But it's really quick by hitting the Q button to get there. Your flash compensation, turning on and off your connected devices, getting to your picture style, white balance for custom white balancing. You've got this right here, which is autocorrect image brightness and contrast is off because I don't want the camera making those changes for me. This is cool because you can actually get in to customize your control settings, which is probably not something you're doing on the fly unless you really need to make a change of something and you know exactly where it is. Back here again, one shot to servo. Let me explain this one more time. One shot means when you press the shutter button halfway down, you're locking your focus in. AI focus is basically continuous autofocus or one shot combined. I know that sounds a little confusing, but the camera is deciding based off of the subject that you're photographing which one it's going to select. So then you also have AI servo, which is for focusing on moving subjects. Super simple. Hold the button halfway down and it's going to continuously focus. Next up, we have where you can change your focus points. So you can see I can dial around and move a single focusing point, or in this case, if I hit the function button right up top, it will change to the different options. You've got zone AF, which is good if you're shooting sports, so it's going to take a reading from most of those focusing points that are highlighted to help you get better autofocus. Next up, you've got select large zone AF. I personally don't use this myself. You've got auto selection AF. That's where the camera's gonna do all of the work and select the focusing point that it thinks it wants to, is best for focus, and then all the way back to the beginning for manually selecting your focusing point. Like I said, there's a ton of different options. Select your metering mode. I leave that exactly where it is. This is set up for single or continuous shooting. So right here, you've got a bunch of different options. One shot every time you shoot a picture or hold your finger down. This is continuous high. When you take and hold your finger down, it's gonna take up to 10 frames per second. You've got low speed continuous, which you can probably set, it's probably around 5 frames a second. You've got silent shooting, which is not silent. You've got silent shooting for multiple shots. It's still not silent, but it's a little quieter. You've got your timer for 10-second remote. You've got your 2-second remote, and you've got your timer for continuous where it will continue. Let's see, press shutter button to shoot set number of shots. So if say you're shooting a group of people and you're in that group and you're like, well, I don't want it to just take one picture when I press the button. I want it to take 10 in a row. Well, you press the shutter button, it counts down, and then it starts taking photos. I use this when I'm making thumbnails for YouTube. It's a good feature, so I could be like, let's see, every time it clicks, I can be like, and that's how I go ahead and shoot thumbnails for myself. There you have it. That's how you can change quickly certain settings that are important right from the Q button on the back of the camera. So right now I want to show you what you're going to see when you hit the live view button on the back of the camera. Now keep in mind, I have the lens cap on so that it's not distracting when I'm showing you all of this and that the stuff isn't moving in the background. So live view shooting means you're going to hold the camera like this and use the LCD to take photos. I highly do not recommend doing this because it is not super stable for one, and it kind of looks amateurish for two. The proper way to shoot, in my opinion, is you look through the viewfinder, you tuck your elbows, you put this left hand underneath the lens, not on the side like this, and definitely not up top like that. You still can look amateur when you do that. This makes you look like a professional. if that's what you actually want to look like. But anyway, we are in live view mode. So at the top of the screen on the top left, you can see M. That lets you know that you're in manual mode. To the right of that, you can see that it has 1,289 photos left, which is more than the 999 that showed up on the top of the screen. So at least inside the camera, it can show you how many images you have left. Next to that, you can see 23, which is your buffer. If you were to take 23 photos in a row, it would fill up the buffer and you would have to wait for it to stop. Now going back to the M and right below that, you see what mode we have. We have AF lock on, we're in one shot. It would be on that continuous shooting. Under C, we've got the metering mode, which is currently set to evaluative, which is taking the brightest and darkest part of the image and giving you a middle ground reading to give you your exposure. Below that, we can see that we're shooting in RAW plus JPEG large. And then down along the bottom of the screen, we've got my shutter speed is at 1/200th, and you can see that it's changing as I dial right, as I dial left. My aperture is at f9. As I turn the back dial, it's dialing down and dialing back up. You've got your meter. You can see that the Wi-Fi is off. And we've got exposure simulation is currently on. Exposure simulation means that as I change my shutter speed or aperture, I'm actually going to show you this. I'm taking this off. Let me show you. I'm going to dial back from f11 to 3.5, and I'm going to show the shutter speed getting slower and slower. Let me focus. Now we can see that it's in focus. I'm at a half a second. But what this exposure simulation is showing me is that it's showing me that it's getting darker or it's getting brighter. So it's giving me an exact representation of what my image would look like before you take the picture. So that is one of the things that I love about live view shooting, except for I don't like when you have to hold the camera out like this. And then right below there, you can see that it's currently set to ISO 100. At the top of the screen on the right, you've got auto white balance. You have your picture style, and then you've got the auto correction for backlighting, which is off. And then you have the other, the filter modes, which is also off as well. So to get out of live view mode, you would go ahead and hit the start stop button again, which will turn off live view. Being that some of you would like to know how you shoot video with this 90D, I'm going to go into the menu and show you some of the settings so we can figure out together what I think you should set them to. Now, to get into the video menu settings, you actually have to flick the switch and go into the movie mode, which means your mirror flips up out of the way and locks out of the way, and the camera is active the whole time. It's one of the things I wish that Canon would change, is allow me to get into the menu without actually having to flip the mirror up and waste battery. But here we are in the menu settings for video. The first thing we see under the camera mode, now keep in mind this one's actually going to be shorter because we only need to go through these first 4 menus, not the rest of them, because they're basically the same as if you were shooting photos. Movie record quality, let's go ahead and click in there. We can see that we've got movie record quality is set to 4K at 29.97 frames per second. So basically 30 frames a second, and it gives you 29:59 of record time. Not unlimited, but 30 minutes of record time before it stops. Now I do want to mention that we did not update the firmware inside of this camera yet, but Canon did release a firmware update that will let you shoot at 24 frames a second, which gives you that cinematic look that you see when you're watching the movies. It will give you that in 4K. You also have the option to do 1080p at 60 frames a second. Then we have 1080 at 29.97, basically 30 frames per second. Then 1080 at the exact same thing in light IPB. I would not recommend shooting in this. This is a more compressed video file. I never like dumbing it down because once you dumb it down, you can't dumb it back up. So if you start with higher quality, you can always dumb it down, but you can't start dumbed down and go back up. And then finally, you've got 1280 at 720 at 60 frames per second, which I don't really recommend that you shoot in either. Would you like to show the world that you shoot RAW? Well, if so, head on over to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com because that's where you can pick up this I Shoot RAW shirt as well as a ton of other different designs and colors and a bunch of different swag. So head on over to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com to pick up some swag right now. Next up, we see high frame rate is currently disabled. This is where we're gonna go if we wanna shoot slow motion at 120 frames per second. See, it's on disabled, but when we go over to enabled, it goes movie servo AF, movie digital IS, and audio not available. AF not available in high video movie recording. So you're not gonna get audio recording, you're not gonna get continuous autofocus. It's going to basically give you slow motion, make sure you're focused before you do it, and it's a baked in file, so it's already gonna be slowed down when you watch it back. So you can record up to 7 minutes and 29 seconds in the 1080 at 120 frames per second. Moving on, we see 4K movie cropping is currently disabled. What this means is that you are getting a full width recording at 4K, a full readout of the sensor. Now, if you want to go in there and crop it, you enable it, but don't read what this says because the English on this is really bad. I'm not even gonna try to read it. Basically what it's saying is that you're putting a crop on top of the crop that you already have because this is a crop sensor camera. So it will actually zoom in a little more. So all of your lenses will be multiplied when you're shooting 4K. This may actually give you a better quality 4K than if you shot it with the full readout, edge to edge, reading the full frame of the sensor when shooting 4K. But keep in mind, when this is active, you are adding a crop on top of a crop, so your wide angle lenses won't act as wide as they once were. So I'm just going to leave this on disabled. Back into the menu, a couple of more things here. We've got sound recording is set to auto. You can go in here and change that if you want to do it manual or turn it off altogether. Manual, you can go in here and change your record levels like I'm doing right now. Let me hit it, change it, because we want to see that it's not peaking in the red. I'm going to move it quicker and quicker and quicker. Come on, let's go. Move. Move. Dial down. Ah, there we go. You see that? That's where you want to see your audio levels so it's not peaking into the red. This is much better. We've got wind filter attenuator. I kind of leave this off at all times because I don't want it to add some other weird sounding compression to it that I don't like. We've got movie digital IS because this does not have image stabilization built into the camera. It does have image stabilization in some of the lenses, but this is currently disabled. It actually works pretty well for when you're walking. It will crop in just a little bit, but the IS that's digital is actually pretty good these days. Lens aberration correction, I don't go in and change that at all. Time-lapse movie mode is disabled, remote control is disabled, and the video snapshot is disabled as well. Here you can see exposure compensation when it comes to shooting video, ISO speed. These are very similar settings that you would see when you are doing your photos. Remember, white balance is going to be locked in. So if you're outside and it's cloudy and you want to have a cloudy white balance, well, go in there and set your white balance to where it needs to be dependent upon the situation that you're in. You can do a custom white balance. You can do a white balance correction. Picture style is set to auto, but if you're shooting something that's more landscapey, you may want to change that. If you want to shoot in black and white, I recommend not doing it in the camera and just changing that in post. Just make sure that your picture style is set properly and that it's not over sharpened and looks bad because you can't go back after this because you're not shooting raw video. Doesn't have that capability. High ISO speed, noise reduction is off. HDMI info display is currently on because we want to show you the dirty out to the camera. You're seeing this right now. Generally, you're going to want to have that on off. AF method, you've got your AE lock. Let's see what we have here. We've got tracking. Yeah, tracking. That's going to give you your dual pixel AF, which is fantastic when you are shooting video of moving subjects. Movie servo AF is currently enabled. That means that you can do autofocus while you are shooting video. Eye detection AF is something new here. Let's see if it works. Let's go to enable. Let me take off the lens cap and let me show you what's going to happen. Okay, here we go. Here's Steven. Oh, look at his face. Let me see if we can get his eye. There it is. Look at that, it's on his eye. You see how it's tracking him? Oh my God, hey, get in the frame. Actually, that looks really good. That's why I love these cameras. Now let me show you a few more things while this is on. Let me zoom in on that clock. You see how the autofocus is smooth and it's changing automatically? That's because this dual pixel AF is absolutely fantastic. I love the autofocus in this camera. Let me show Steven again. Look at this. Look at this autofocus. We could go, boom. It's on the camera. Now it's on Steven. Now it's back onto the camera. So there you go. Now let me throw this lens cap on so it's not distracting what you're seeing on the screen. And here we go. You can see that we're in movie mode manual. We can see that we have 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 41 seconds of possible record time total. It doesn't mean it's going to run for that long. It will still do the 29:59. Below there, you can see what autofocusing mode we're on. 4K at 30 frames a second. We've got the anti-shake, the IS, digital IS is off. We can see that microphone mode is set to manual. Headphone mode, you can see where the headphones are set. We are in servo AF. You can actually see the left and the right monitors, audio monitor picking up as I speak, which is kind of cool. We're at 1/125th of a second at 5.6. ISO is set to auto. We've got Wi-Fi is currently off. Moving on to the right-hand side of the screen, we've got the movie snapshot mode is currently off. We've got filter modes is off. We've got the auto correction for lighting is off. We can see that picture style is set to auto, and then we have it set to auto white balance as well. Let me jump back into the menu real quick. We can see we've got lens electronic manually focus. I currently set this to off, and that is how you set up the camera for when you want to shoot video and need to make changes inside of the menu. One of the things I didn't show you is how to start recording video and what is on your screen when you are recording video. So let me pop off this lens cap right here. Let me get into live view mode. Right here on the back of the camera, you can see start, stop. As long as we are in the video mode, when I hit start, stop, it is going to record. Watch, boom, I hit record. The recording comes up in the top right-hand side of the screen in red. You can see the timer is counting up, how much battery life we have. To the left of it, oh, you know what's funny? You see that manual, it's showing the cameras in manual. Look, there's a camera right next to it. It's kind of funny how that icon lined up with that camera right there. That's funny. You can see the microphone is set to manual. You can see servo area, the AF is on. All of the same settings at the bottom for auto ISO and your exposure, as well as the meters for the audio. But here it is, boom. Hi, Steven. Oh yeah, Steven looks like he's working hard. And there he is. So let me go ahead and hit stop record again. We hit stop, that takes us out, and basically we are done with how to shoot video. So I know that was a long video, but the point is, if you watch it once, you set up your camera and you understand more of how it works, that means you're gonna be able to get out there into the real world and start taking better photos and better video quicker because you're now more confident in how your camera is set. So if you found this video to be valuable, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video when I post it. Also hit that bell button, that's gonna notify you when a new video goes live. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and that is where I'm gonna leave it. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.